The movie starts off with a beautiful city decorated with lights and ornaments. Christmas is just around the corner, and everyone is already in holiday spirit. Among them is a woman named Sydney, an art director who recently got divorced and is in the process of re-establishing her life. It turns out that Sydney was a stay-at-home, whose only focus was to take care of her daughter, Ray Ann. But after a very brutal divorce, she has no choice but to get back in the job market. As a result, she interviews at an ad agency in New York, hoping to get a job there. After the interview, Sydney packs up her belongings and heads to her hometown of Hopewell with Ray Ann. There, the two explore the charming town. Ray Ann initially finds the slow pace annoying, but quickly warms up to its beauty. She and Sydney get cookies together, and then walk over to a massive bookstore. Inside, Sydney approaches the owner, B, and hugs her tightly. The two chat for quite a while. At one point, Sydney informs B that she and her daughter are staying at her late grandmother's house for the holidays to honor her memory. That was the main reason for her visit to Hopewell. After their brief conversation, B gives Ray Ann a tour of the store while Sydney waits at the counter. Suddenly, she spots a man trying to steal some books. Alarmed, Sydney immediately follows him and observes his actions carefully. Just as he's about to walk out of the store, she stops him and accuses him of shoplifting. She then beckons B over and tells her about the man's actions, but to her surprise, B cheerfully greets the man, Mac, and explains that he's actually their local 4th grade teacher. She further explains that Mac takes as many books as he needs to read to the children, and then pays for them all at the end of the month. Hearing this, Sydney feels deeply embarrassed and remains silent. Shortly after, Mac bids everyone goodbye and leaves the store. In the meantime, B gives Ray Ann one of their famous Christmas books as an early Christmas present and invites both her and Sydney to the tree lighting ceremony happening that night. Sydney readily agrees to the offer thanks B, and walks out of the store. Moments later, Sydney and Ray Ann arrive at their destination. They stand in front of a massive bungalow that Sydney received as an inheritance after her grandmother passed away. Just as they're about to walk in, Diane, who lives next door, greets them and informs them that she has been keeping a close eye on the house. She then tells Ray Ann that she also has a daughter who is excited to make a new friend. Ray Ann lights up upon hearing this and thanks her mom for bringing her to Hopewell. Soon after, Diane, Sydney, and Ray Ann all enter the house. Once inside, Ray Ann immediately runs around and picks out her room, while Diane and Sydney stay back to prepare hot chocolate and snacks. While doing so, Diane asks Sydney how she's doing. Sydney responds by saying that her ex-husband, John, is still very close to Ray Ann and is fulfilling all his duties as a father. She then explains that she's managing well and isn't interested in getting into a relationship anytime soon. Diane nods in understanding and starts to leave. But just as she's about to walk out, Sydney asks if she can help find a good realtor to sell the house. Since Sydney doesn't want to quit her job in New York, she believes it would be best to sell the house and invest the money in Ray Ann's future. Despite some initial hesitation, Diane agrees to help with the sale. She then quietly walks away. A while later, Sydney walks over to Ray Ann and asks if she has picked out a room yet. Ray Ann replies that she has and excitedly shows her mom a treasure chest she found. When they open it, they discover a bunch of beautiful Christmas ornaments that Sydney's grandmother had collected over the years. Ray Ann adores the decorations and asks her mom if they can hang them up for Christmas. However, Sydney declines, explaining that she doesn't want to put up a tree this year. Disappointed, Ray Ann asks why. Sydney explains that since Ray Ann will be going on vacation to Hawaii with John, she doesn't see the point in decorating the entire house just to spend Christmas alone. Ray Ann understands and nods quietly. The scene now shifts to Mac, who bids his students goodbye for the holidays before heading to B's bookstore to drop off a list of books his students might need. B gladly accepts the list and mentions that Sydney's daughter, Ray Ann, is the same age as his students. She suggests that Mac spend some time with Ray Ann to help her get accustomed to the town. Mac readily agrees and exits the store. That evening, Sydney and Ray Ann attend the tree lighting ceremony and observe the beautiful surroundings. As they walk around, they run into B, who greets them warmly. She then introduces them to Mac once again. It's evident that she wants Mac and Sydney to get together, since they're both single and perfect for each other. However, since neither Sydney nor Mac is interested in a relationship, they simply ignore the idea. Ray Ann, on the other hand, takes a liking to Mac and chats with him happily. After all the townspeople gather, the mayor wishes everyone a Merry Christmas and invites his dear friend B to light the Christmas tree. B gladly does so, officially kicking off the Christmas festivities. Amidst the festivities, Mac asks Sydney if she's from Hopewell as well. Sydney explains that her grandparents used to live there, and she would visit them during the holidays. However, now that they've both passed away, she plans to sell the house and move back to New York permanently. As they're talking, a woman bumps into Sydney, causing her to fall right into Mac's arms. The situation becomes awkward, so Sydney quickly grabs Rayanne, and they leave the ceremony. In the process, Sydney accidentally leaves her scarf with Mac. Later, Sydney tries to drive away as quickly as possible, but much to her dismay, the car breaks down. Just then, Mac walks over and returns Sydney's scarf. He then offers to take a look at their car to see if he can fix it. Sydney hesitantly agrees and waits. After inspecting the car, Mac informs her that it needs to be sent to a garage due to issues with the fuel pump. Since it's already nighttime, Mac offers to give them a ride home. Sydney declines, not wanting to be a bother, but Mac mentions that he's heading to the same place. It turns out that Mac is actually Diane's brother and was just about to visit her. Hearing this, Sydney reluctantly agrees, and the three of them drive away together. During the ride, Rayanne, who has grown fond of Mac, asks him to fix some gadgets around their house, since many of them are broken. Mac readily agrees and does his best to repair the furnace and heating system. In the meantime, Sydney puts Rayanne to bed and then prepares some hot chocolate for herself and Mac. While sipping on their drinks, a very embarrassed Sydney apologizes to Mac for calling him a thief and also for running from him earlier. She explains that after her divorce, she became quite isolated, making social situations awkward for her. Mac smiles and forgives her instantly. They then talk about how they're both single by choice and have no interest in relationships, but it's clear that both Sydney and Mac are incredibly lonely, with no one by their side. After talking for a while, Mac gets up to leave. However, just as he's about to walk out, Sydney stops him and hands him a Christmas ornament as a thank you gift since she isn't putting up a tree this year. Mac gratefully thanks her and then exits the house. The next morning, Sydney and Rayanne visit B's store again. As soon as they step inside, Rayanne eagerly runs around, searching for another book that might catch her interest. Meanwhile, B, who is chatting with the mayor, greets Sydney warmly and hands her a book that she herself picked out. Sydney gratefully accepts the book and thanks B for the thoughtful gesture. At that moment, the mayor wishes Sydney a good morning, and she returns the greeting. The mayor then asks Sydney to help him convince B to participate in this year's Christmas Carousel, an event where all the Main Street merchants stay open all night, serving hot cocoa and cookies to tourists and townspeople alike. In the end, the shop with the most beautiful window displays and the most sales wins a grand prize. Moving forward, the mayor is eager for B to join the Christmas Carousel, but B hesitates. With a heavy sigh, she explains that she feels too old to handle making snacks and setting up window displays all by herself. Hearing this, Sydney offers to help B with the store since she doesn't have anything going on at the moment. B hesitates, but eventually agrees, on the condition that she gets to pay Sydney for her hard work. The two finally come to an agreement and immediately start thinking of ideas for their window display. Later that day, Sydney visits a Christmas tree farm and admires the beautiful trees. Although she doesn't plan to put up a Christmas tree in her house, she thinks that having one at B's store would be a great idea. Just as she's browsing around, Sydney gets hit by a log of wood and falls down. Thankfully, Mac rushes by her side and helps her up while asking if she's okay. Sydney assures him that she is and then asks what he's doing at the tree farm. Mac explains that Diane and her husband Todd own the farm, and he helps them during Christmas since it gets really busy. Sydney nods in understanding and asks for his help in selecting a tree. Mac readily agrees, and together, they choose the perfect tree for the bookstore. Afterward, Mac helps load the tree onto Sydney's car and bids her goodbye. Just as Mac is about to leave, he receives a text about an emergency at Santa Village. He rushes there, only to find out that his friend Kenny, who was supposed to be the town Santa, has been severely injured. As a result, Mac is reluctantly forced to take on the role of the town Santa for this year. Later that same day, Sydney and Rayanne take the Christmas tree to B's bookstore and decorate it with beautiful ornaments. Just then, Diane and her daughter Sarah walk into the store. Sarah and Rayanne instantly become friends and proceed to look at all the different books together. Meanwhile, Diane and Sydney start chatting. At one point, Diane asks Sydney if she's sure about not wanting a Christmas tree. Sydney replies that she is. That's when Diane exclaims that Mac never puts up Christmas trees either, since it's a really difficult time for him. Sydney gets concerned upon hearing this and asks further, but Diana hesitates, claiming that it's not her story to share. Sydney quickly gets the gist and changes the topic. Eventually, after a brief conversation, Diane exits the store, while Sydney looks after both the girls. Just then, Bea walks up to Sydney to talk about some of the decorations. Sydney takes this opportunity to suggest they start a Christmas book club for the children at the store. She explains that it's a brilliant idea to get the kids together and help with their learning through exciting Christmas stories. Bea readily agrees to the idea and decides to bring out the list of books that Mac had previously given to her. Sydney then tells her entire plan to Bea about their decorations for the carousel. It's evident that she's really excited for the event. Back in Santa Village, a very distraught Mac puts on Santa's costume and starts meeting up with all the kids. He greets them excitedly and even hands them tiny little presents. On the other hand, Sydney drops Sarah off with Diane after the two kids finish playing and take Ray Ann to Santa's village. There, Ray Ann happily looks at the children bonding with Santa and gets really excited. When it's finally her turn, Ray Ann sits on Santa's lap and asks him for a favor. With the most innocent eyes, she requests Santa, aka Mac, to make her mom happy again since she's always depressed and sad after her divorce. Mac readily agrees to help Ray Ann and then gives her a small present. That night, Ray Ann excitedly calls her dad to share all her adventures in Hopewell. However, John tells her that he's busy and doesn't engage in the conversation. He simply hangs up, promising to listen to her stories during their vacation together. A disheartened Ray Ann agrees to this, but deep down, she feels really upset. Sydney quickly notices this and asks if she's okay. Ray Ann replies that she is, and the only thing that's bothering her is that she likes Hopewell way too much now. With a solemn face, she says that she's not sure about going to Hawaii or even returning back to New York. Hearing this, Sydney reassures her, promising that they'll visit Hopewell every year during Christmas and have plenty of fun. As they're talking, there's a knock on the door. Sydney opens it to find Mac standing there with a huge Christmas tree. With a smirk, Mac explains that he was delivering trees in the neighborhood and ended up with one extra. He offers it to Sydney, asking if she'd like to take it. Upon learning this, Ray Ann practically begs her mom to take the tree, and Sydney finally agrees. She happily sets up the tree in their house, and Ray Ann quickly gets busy decorating it. To thank him, Sydney offers Mac a cup of hot chocolate. The three of them enjoy their drinks while decorating the tree with beautiful ornaments. After a lot of hard work, Sydney, Mac, and Ray Ann end up with a stunning Christmas tree. As Mac prepares to leave, he invites Sydney and Ray Ann to the upcoming gingerbread house building competition. Ray Ann is thrilled about the event and promises to attend. Later, Mac arrives home and immediately opens his laptop. He begins working on his book, titled Hope at Christmas. It turns out that Mac always wanted to be a writer and planned on writing a book. However, he kept on getting writer's block, because of which he hadn't even started with it. However, after meeting Ray Ann and witnessing her belief in Santa, his writer's block clears. Inspired and excited, he finally begins writing the first chapter of his book. The following day, Sydney goes to Bea's bookstore to help restock the shelves. Just then, Mayor Gray arrives with a beautiful bouquet and urges Bea to participate in the Christmas carousel. After much persuasion, Bea agrees and begins planning for the event. The mayor, thrilled with her decision, thanks Bea profusely before leaving. A while later, Sydney clocks out of the store and picks Ray Ann up for the gingerbread house building competition. At the event, the two of them start working on making the best gingerbread house. As they work, Mayor Gray meticulously judges each participant's creation and gives them points accordingly. Meanwhile, in Santa Village, Mac takes photos with all the children and hands out presents. He tries to hurry, since he has to attend the gingerbread house building competition as well, where Sydney and Ray Ann are eagerly waiting for him. Finally, after a long time, Mac gets out of his costume and runs towards the town hall. In the meantime, Ray Ann and Sydney complete their gingerbread house and anxiously await the results. When the moment finally arrives, Ray Ann is thrilled to be selected as the winner. Elated, she receives a box full of cookies and proudly shows them off to her mom. Soon after, Mac arrives at the town hall, but unfortunately it's too late. He discovers that Ray Ann and Sydney have already left. Disappointed, he sadly walks out of the place. Back at home, Sydney and Ray Ann plan to share their cookies with the rest of the kids at the book club. As Ray Ann sets her prize down, she sadly asks Sydney why Mac didn't come to support them. In response, Sydney tells her that Mac was probably busy and couldn't attend due to personal reasons. Ray Ann simply nods her head at this and proceeds to go to bed. Early the next morning, a realtor comes over to Sydney's house and observes it carefully. After a thorough inspection, he tells Sydney that the place is too old and would need some work to be sold at a good price. Sydney agrees with this and plans on hiring a contractor soon. That day, Ray Ann goes back to Santa Village, where she thanks Santa for helping her by sending Mac to their house with a Christmas tree. Still unaware that Santa is actually Mac himself, she expresses her gratitude for making her mom happy again. However, moments later, she exclaims that Sydney was happy only for a split second before becoming upset again. When Mac, disguised as Santa, asks her what she wants, she says she wants him to arrange for her mom to go to Paris, since that's her dream destination. Mac thinks for a while before agreeing to her request. Later, Mac goes to B's bookstore, where he awkwardly approaches Sydney and apologizes for not arriving at the town hall in time. Guilt-ridden, he explains that something urgent came up that he had to take care of. In response, Sydney simply smiles and assures him that it's okay. However, Mac still feels extremely bad for standing her up and asks her out to dinner instead. Sydney initially tries to refuse, but after seeing Mac's apologetic face, she hesitantly agrees. Moments later, Mac and Sydney arrive at a beautiful restaurant. Upon entering, Sydney realizes that Mac has arranged a special French dinner and even hired an accordion player. Not only that, but Mac also gives her a French Santa Claus statue. Impressed, Sydney thanks Mac for the present and asks him why he went to such lengths for their dinner. In response, Mac smiles and tells her that he just wanted to give her a taste of Paris. As the dinner continues, Sydney asks Mac to tell her more about himself. Mac shares that he started off as a writer, but his book didn't do well. Because of this, he began working as a teacher. And then about 2 years ago, Mac's wife Catherine, who he had dated since high school, got extremely sick and passed away. Ever since then, he got writer's block and just couldn't bring himself to write a book ever again. This was also the reason why Mac stopped putting up Christmas trees in his house. Sydney expresses her condolences upon hearing all this and tries to sympathize with him. At one point, Mac exclaims that he doesn't want to live in the past anymore. Wanting to experience life again, he tells Sydney that he has started writing a book with her as his muse. As expected, Sydney is surprised by this and thanks him for the compliment. The two then chat about other things and get to know each other better. It's evident that they are starting to fall for each other. After dinner, Mac drops Sydney off at her car and bids her goodbye. He then tries to kiss her, but the moment becomes a little awkward, so he quickly pulls back. That night, Sydney goes to Diane's house to pick up Ray Ann. As she looks through the window, she sees her daughter and Sarah bonding and opening several presents together. Just as she's about to enter the house, she gets a call from the ad agency, informing her that she's been hired to work as an associate art director. Sydney is shocked by the news and doesn't know how to react. The next morning, Ray Ann and Sydney go to B's bookstore, where Ray Ann immediately joins her friends for the book club. Meanwhile, Sydney approaches B, only to notice that she seems a bit upset. When Sydney inquires further, B reveals that she is retiring and planning to sell the bookstore. As expected, Sydney is devastated and asks B to reconsider, pointing out how much everyone loves the place. However, B sadly explains that she has already made up her mind. Sydney then tries to leave, but Max stops her and invites her to join their first book club meeting. Unfortunately, Sydney declines, saying she has a few errands to run. She then quickly walks away. Moments later, Sydney returns to New York for her final interview at the ad agency. Despite feeling nervous, she takes a deep breath and confidently presents herself before the board of directors, starting her interview. That evening, Sydney and Ray Ann join Mac at the church for a Christmas carol sing-along. The three of them sit together, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Soon after, they start singing various Christmas hymns and carols. A couple of hours later, after the sing-along has ended, Mac asks Sydney if she's finished with her errands. Sydney replies that she is, and then reveals that she got a job as an art director at a renowned ad agency in New York. Despite feeling heartbroken, Mac congratulates her on the success and wishes her the best. Sydney thanks him but confides that she is very attached to Hopewell and its people. With a deep sigh, she admits that it will be hard for her to leave. That's when Mac asks her to stay, but Sydney refuses. The conversation quickly becomes awkward, so Sydney bids Mac goodbye and leaves the church with Ray Ann. With just 2 days until Christmas, the town is filled with Christmas carols and presents. Back at her house, Sydney is making breakfast when she suddenly gets a call from B, who tells her that the Christmas tree at the bookstore is in shambles. Upon hearing this, Sydney rushes to the store and is shocked to see the state of the place. It turns out that the tree stand gave up, causing the tree to crash down. A very distraught B laments that the carousel is in a couple of hours, and their tree is completely ruined. However, Sydney assures her that they'll come up with a solution soon. She then calls Mac, asking him to get her a tree as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Mac informs her that he just sold the last tree. Suddenly, Sydney has a brilliant idea. Now excited, she asks Mac to come to the bookstore as soon as possible and then hangs up. Shortly after, Sydney, with the help of a bunch of little kids, creates a massive Christmas tree made entirely of hundreds of books, with presents surrounding them. The entire bookstore looks absolutely stunning. and Bea profusely thanks Sydney for her help. Sydney simply smiles and looks around, only to realize that Rayanne is nowhere to be found. At that moment, one of the kids tells her that Rayanne is hiding behind the store because she's upset. Concerned, Sydney rushes to Rayanne and asks her what's wrong. In response, Rayanne tells her mom that she doesn't want to go to Hawaii with her dad. She wants to spend Christmas with her friends in Hopewell. Understanding her daughter's feelings, Sydney reassures her that she can spend Christmas in Hopewell. However, Rayanne is worried about hurting her dad's feelings by not going to Hawaii with him. Sydney comforts her by saying that her dad only wants what's best for her and would be just as happy if she spent Christmas in Hopewell. Finally, after a long conversation, Rayanne smiles gleefully and runs back inside the store. Finally, the Christmas carousel commences, and the mayor walks around the entire town, carefully observing each store and its window displays. Eventually, he reaches Bea's bookstore and is mesmerized by the stunning display before him. Awestruck, the mayor, along with a crowd of others, applauds Bea and Sydney, praising them for their creative idea. Just then, Mac shows up at the bookstore as well and compliments Sydney for her wit. He then asks her about her plans to sell the house and return to New York. Sydney replies that she isn't sure yet. Before she can explain further, Mac's friend Kenny approaches and wishes them a Merry Christmas. He also thanks Mac for taking over as the town Santa. Upon hearing this, Sydney quickly realizes that Mac is the Santa Rayanne has been talking to. Now infuriated, she asks if he took her to dinner and the Christmas Carol sing-along because he felt sorry for her after hearing from Rayanne that she's always upset. Mac immediately denies this and tries to explain, but Sydney storms off before he can finish. It's Christmas Eve now, just a day before Sydney and Rayanne are supposed to leave for New York. Bea's bookstore wins first prize for the Christmas carousel, leading to a significant increase in sales. Despite the success, Bea is distraught because she is being forced to sell the store soon. To make matters worse, the new buyers plan to tear down the store and build a condo in its place. As Bea and the realtor discuss the sale, a heartbroken Sydney overhears their conversation and tries to think of a way to salvage the situation. Just as Bea is about to sign the contract, Sydney steps in and tells her that she'll buy the store instead. She proposes that they start a partnership and work together to preserve the magic of the bookstore. Needless to say, Bea readily agrees, smiling excitedly at the new possibility. Later that day, Sydney closes the store and heads back home. There, she finishes reading the book that Bea had given her. When she reaches the last page, she is shocked to discover that the author is none other than Mac. Just as she processes this surprising revelation, the doorbell rings. Sydney hurries to the door and, to her astonishment, finds Mac standing there. With no other excuse, Mac sheepishly hands back the ornament that Sydney had given him earlier and apologizes for not being honest sooner. Taking a deep breath, he admits that he was so eager to see her happy that he completely forgot to reveal the truth. Upon hearing this, Sydney simply smiles, forgiving him immediately. She then reassures him that his book is perfect and further informs him that she's decided not to sell the house anymore. Mac, overjoyed by her words, pulls her into a passionate kiss, which Sydney happily reciprocates. The movie finally ends with Sydney and Mac giving each other a chance and embarking on a new journey together.